Okay gang, Private Jack here. Welcome to part 9 in my series on how to decompile a valve model, get it into Blender, do some editing, and fire it back at Source FilmMaker. In this session, what we're going to do is we're going to get the model finalized and exported. We're going to write a quick QC and compile the model. We're going to try and use Blender and Crowbar as compiling tools. So let's get started. We're going to open up Blender. We're going to open up that project file that we've been working with. Here it is. We're not worried about these materials anymore because we've got new materials that are going to replace it in Source FilmMaker. First thing I want to do is I want to check and make sure that all the vertices are weighted and assigned to the bone that we have. So this bone is really small and hard to select. I'm going to use the outliner tool here and basically come into my armature area and select the metal bone. If I want to, what I can use is the numpad period key, and what that will do is it will zoom in on anything that is selected and set that item up as the pivot point for the 3D or for the work camera. With that bone selected, I'm going to go into pose mode, and I'm also going to turn on screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so basically with the bone selected and in pose mode, I'm going to hit R a couple of times until I get this little icon that goes in 4 directions. And I'm just going to take and I'm going to spin this model around to make sure that all the vertices move with the bone. As I mentioned before in other sessions of this tutorial, because this is a working model out of TF, all the bone weights should already be assigned to the bones. We shouldn't have to worry about weight painting. But because I moved that one bone, I just want to make sure that the model moves and it looks fine. If you end up with, we'll go into that later. Okay, so with that done, the next thing I want to do is I want to check the materials again. So I'm going to select the model and come into the materials tab, and I just want to make sure that my materials are uniquely named for this model in such a way that they're not going to interfere with other materials for models that I already have. And they look okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is go into Blender Source Tools, and I'm going to set that up. The way that I set it up is as follows. Export path is where I want my SMD or DMX files to export to. So I click on the little folder. I'm going to go into my photo project folder, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call that DMX. I prefer to use DMX files. You can use SMDs if you want, but they are passe, and DMX is the way of the future, boys. So get used to using it. I'm going to drill into that DMX folder, and I'm going to accept it. So now when I export, my exports are going to go to that DMX folder. Next thing is selecting the export format. I prefer DMX now. I used to use SMDs, but now DMX is the way to go. For the model, the up axis, my up axis is Z, so I'm going to leave that as is on Z. If this model was lying on the ground and I wanted it to stand up in game, I would select Y or X depending on which way the top of the model was pointed. Next one is engine path, and what this is the folder that the flavor of Studio MDL is for the mod that you are creating the model for. In my case, I'm creating for Source Filmmaker, and Source Filmmaker has its own flavor of Studio MDL. So I'm going to click on the folder, and that lives in my Source Filmmaker game bin folder. Right here, there's the Studio MDL and the Studio MDL bat that I want to use. So with that folder selected, I click Accept. Material path I'm not going to fill in. I want to put the material path in my QC so that the models will actually find it. If I put a folder in here and the model uses materials from folders other than the one that I put in here, for some strange reason the model has a really hard time to find them, and you could end up with black and purple checkerboards on your model. So I'm just going to leave that blank. Here in the exportables areas, it shows you the objects that can be exported with the tool. Okay, in this case there's only one object, and that's this object here. But as you saw in the sniper demonstration that I did, there were a whole ton of objects in here. I can check them on or off if I want to export them in the scene, and basically we'll get into that a little bit deeper when we actually do the export. Not going to worry about subfolder. There are no vertex animations like I showed you. The shape keys that move the face, there's none in this model. The game path, what this is I'm going to use Blender Source Tools as my compiler interface. So what I need to do is I need to tell Blender Source Tools where the game info text file lives for the mod that I am creating the model for. In this case, I'm clicking the folder. I'm going to go into Source Filmmaker, Game, User Mod, and that is where the game info text file lives for creating Source Filmmaker models. I'm going to click Accept on that. And finally, the QC. This is the place where I am going to put my QC. You see this little button here? Right now it thinks that there is a QC file in a folder that I was using before. I'm going to click on that folder, and I usually put my QCs in the DMX folder with my exports. So as soon as I select that folder and click Accept, that button is going to disappear, and this area down here is going to turn red, which means that there's no QCs in that particular folder at this time. With that done, Blender Source Tools is now set up. I can go and I can write my QC. So I'm just going to minimize this. I'm going to open up Notepad++. Okay, I'm going to create a new file, and basically what I can do is, because I created this from a Valve model with by decompiling it with Crowbar, Crowbar actually created a QC. So I can just go back to that project folder, oh, I hate it when it does that, desktop, photo project, and I can load up that QC file that was created when I decompiled the model. These are the various commands that Crowbar found in the model. Okay, and what it has done is commented out anything that can possibly change after doing the edit. So what you see here is this is an actual comment. It's telling me what what VMTs are being used and where they live for the original model. It's this information here is information that can change if you do an edit. So basically it comments all this stuff out. This stuff isn't really required to compile a model, but it is required in the model eventually. We're going to go through that as we write up this QC. All models must have a sequence. It doesn't matter if it's an idle sequence or if it's a walking sequence or whatever it is, it must have at least one sequence. And we're going to get into that too when we edit this QC. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove created by Crowbar because it's not required. And let's just have a quick look here at something. I'm going to open up the Valve Developer Wiki. And if I do a search on QC and open up this category on QC commands, this is a list of all the various all the various QC commands that can be used when compiling a model. And if you click on them, like for that illumination position, it will take you and it'll give you a brief description of what that command is used for and how to use it. Back to QC commands, and basically this is where I get my information for writing my QCs. So model name is the name of the model and where it is going to live relative to the user mod models folder. So in my case I want it to go to private jack models props, and I'm going to also put it in a folder called pbadge, and I'm going to name the model pbadge underscore new .mdl. That is a pretty unique name, and it shouldn't interfere with any other model that I have in my inventory. Okay, next thing is body groups, body and model. If you come here and you look at the fundamentals, model is used primarily if there are flexes in the model. So the reason for that is that there are other commands that you can add to this particular command to control some of the flexes. As this model doesn't have any flexes, I'm not going to worry about that. Move back. Body, as that description said, is used for primarily anything that doesn't need to be changed. By changed, I mean like the sniper's hat was a body group. It could be turned on or turned off. The sniper's arm and the arm with glove were two different models that could be interchanged. For that type of environment, you need to use a body group. But if the model is whole and in one place and isn't going to be changed, using $body is good enough. Let's go back to the QC. In this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a body group, and I'm going to actually have it so that I can spawn the model and turn it off or turn it on. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use body group, and I'm going to call the body group body. And anytime that you use a body group, if there's mesh involved, you have to use a studio prefix to before the actual DMX file that you're going to create. So basically, in this case, what's going to be exported is photo badge reference DMX, photo badge reference, and I change that extension to DMX. CD materials. This is where we're going to actually tell the model where the materials live. So in this particular case, I want to keep the root directory known. I also want to tell it that my materials are going to live in, and this is relative to the user mod materials folder. So models, private jack, props, p badge, and that is where my model materials are going to live. Now I'm going to create an error in this QC by not closing off the CD materials with a quote. I started it with a quote, I should end it with a quote. Surface prop, basically default, we'll just leave that the way it is. Contents are solid. And another command that I usually put in all my QCs is $ mostly opaque. What mostly opaque does is it causes the model to go through and do a second render of any materials that it finds to be transparent. Okay, and what it'll do is it'll go through, it will render anything that's opaque, then it'll come back through and it'll pick up any of the materials that are translucent. Okay, back we go. Illumination position, I'm not going to worry about. It's needed for special circumstances such as Gibbs, and I have no Gibbs in this particular model. Binding boxes, I'm not going to worry about. I don't require a binding box in my Source Filmmaker model. CD box, I have no idea what that is, and I don't even know if it's listed here anymore. I'm not even going to go looking for it. CD box. Oh, C box, there it is. Such collision box for model. What coordinates are relative is currently unknown. So no one really knows what this thing is about. Hitboxes. Hitboxes are important, but for now I don't require it to do an initial compile. I'm going to leave it the way it is. Actually, I just might turn on the default hitbox set. So I just want to check that command out because sometimes this works and sometimes that it doesn't. Hitbox set. Create named hitbox. Okay. I'm going to leave that set to default and leave it checked on. Lastly, what we get into is the sequence. All models must have a sequence, as I said before. In this particular, when we did the decompile, it actually created a idle SMD file. Unfortunately, because we've moved bones and moved mesh around, this particular file won't work for us anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the main reference mesh and I'm going to use that as the sequence. So copy that and drop that right in here. Control V, and this is going to become my idle sequence. Now, because the model doesn't move, the FPS rate doesn't really matter. I'm going to turn that down to 1 frame per second. Okay, now that we have that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to File and save this as in my DMX folder, and watch down here what happens when I save the QC. I'm going to save this as pbadge. .qc. As soon as I hit enter, and with that QC path pointed to my DMX folder, it automatically creates a compile button. Okay, now for Crowbar, I'm going to rename this model as pbadge new underscore CB for Crowbar. And nothing, oh, I know what I forgot. Before I do that, I have to put in my texture groups or it's not going to find those new skins that we made for it. So, after I did the CD materials, I'm going to have multiple skins. So, what I need to use is a texture group for multiple skins. The frame is not going to change, so I don't have to identify it. It's already identified here in the materials, and it will find that material anyway. But for the photos, they actually change. So I'm going to add a $ texture group, and I'm going to give it a name of photo. And I'm going to open up the texture group by using a curly bracket. Next, I'm going to come down here, and in my materials, the first material must be called pbadge decal. So, quote on pbadge underscore deco. Before I do that, I got to turn on this particular skin with a curly bracket, and I have to turn it off with a curly bracket. The next skin can be named whatever I want it to be named, but this particular skin must be named the same as the actual material name that I gave it in Blender. Okay, so hit enter. Next material I'm going to call photo 2. Actually, let's call it decal 2. pbadge, let's keep it all unique. Copy, and this means I may have to change the names of my photos when I actually, and this is going to be 1. Add the next one. This one is going to be 2. I missed the, copy that. Delete that. Control V. This one is going to be pdecal 2 and pdecal 3. And I'm going to have 5 material skins for this particular model. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one is going to be 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 materials. Now to close off the group, I have to close off the group with a curly bracket. So anything between these two curly brackets is part of this photo group, and these are the materials that are going to be replaced. Okay, that should take care of my actual QC. I'm going to file save that again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one for compiling with Crowbar. So I'm just going to rename the model to CB. Okay, that should, oh, here, almost forgot. Take that out. And like I said, body group, what I want to do is I want to create a body that I can turn off. So studio and the name of the DMX file that's going to be compiled. And then under that, I'm going to put blank. So on, off. If I put blank ahead of the studio, it would spawn in invisible mode. Now I can save this, and we're ready to rock with Blender. And here I'm going to change this to CB, and I'm going to save this one as pbadge_CB, and we'll use this QC to compile from Crowbar. Now if I look at my Blender source tools, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see 2 QC buttons here now because I put that in the same folder as the original. Okay, let's get ready to rock and roll. To export the model, once I have Blender source tools set up, all I have to do is click on the export button, and it's going to give me the option to either export the selected object that I have in exportables or the entire group of DMX files that are in the scene. So it will export them if the checkbox is turned on. If the checkbox is turned off, it will not export anything. There's nothing in the scene. Okay, so export, I'm going to export the scene, and up here what I'm going to find is a message telling me that the file either exported or that there was an error. If there was an error, what I would do is I would come into my Windows file option here, or menu option here, and toggle on the system console. And in here I'm going to find any information about that last process with any errors that have been reported. In this case, one file exported in less than a second. When you're in this screen, never press that X button unless you want to exit Blender, because as soon as you push that X button, Blender shuts down. Either minimize it or turn the screen off. Now that the file is exported, if I go into my folder, I'm going to find my QCs that I wrote and that DMX file. Okay, now that that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, and I've caused an error in the QC. I'm going to compile it. So I click on the QC button, and right here, 0 compiled, 1 error. So I go back into my console view, which will now be minimized. There it is. And here's the information on that compile. And what I can read here is that it was compiling, and then all of a sudden it found an error on line 12. Bad command, and it has a curly bracket there. This is why I like Notepad++. Basically, I can come into my file, and I'm going to open up that QC because I renamed. There we go. So I've got both of those files. Okay, I'm going to come into the QC, come down here to line 12, and what is going on here? That's the wrong one. File, open. There it is, pbadge QC. Okay, move that on this side. I'm going to come down here to line 12, and I'm going to see that there's nothing there. And the next thing that comes up is the texture group with the curly bracket. So looking at that command, that is a good command. I go to the one before it, and remember I told you I left the quotation mark off of the end of the CD materials. I'm going to add that. I'm not going to do it in the Crowbar QC yet because I want to see if it's going to report an error. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to bad just to cause another error. File, save as, or save. Once I save that, all I have to do is click on the QC button again. Click on the QC button. Didn't compile, still have another error. So I'm going to go back into my system console. I'm going to read the information. Line 13, bad command. Text group. Oh, I must have misspelt something. So scroll up here to line 13. Text group should be texture group. Save it. Compile the QC again. Still another error. What's going on here? So I open up that system console view again, and down on line 58, it could not load the file bad photo badge reference DMX. The reason being, there's no such animal in my mix. So open up the QC again, come down and fix the error. Save the file, and run the QC again. This time, one compiled source FilmMaker QC. So if I go into my source FilmMaker user mod, models, private jack, P badge folder, I am going to find the DMX files for the, or not the DMX files, I'm going to find the actual model files for this model. Okay, let's go into Crowbar and do the compile test. So I'm going to launch Crowbar. As I said in the decompile session, Crowbar is not only a decompiler, but it is a compiler interface as well. Click on the compiler tab, and usually Crowbar is set up to run Gary's mod. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, to set this thing up for Source FilmMaker, and if you look down here, you can see that it is set up for Gary's mod. If you come up here and click on this down arrow button and select source filmmaker, it's going to find the location for Studio MDL in the game source filmmaker game bin folder, and it's going to tell it that the game info text file is located in source filmmaker game user mod. If perchance you have this installed on an F drive or somewhere else, you can change the actual setup, and the way that you do that is by coming up here and clicking on the setup games button. All you have to do is browse to where these files live on your particular system. Do a save and close, and the tool is set up. Now, for the QC, we're going to browse, and we're going to go into the Photo Project DMX folder and pick up that Photo Badge CBQC. So now it's telling it that it wants to do verbose pbadge CBQC. Once that's there, all I have to do is click on the Compile QC. It'll run through, and it found an error on line 12. And that is our little error that we created by not putting in the quotation marks. File save that. Recompile. Found an error on line 13, which is the text group should be texture group. Save that. Recompile. Compiling, gets down to here, and it says everything is hunky-dory. Look back through the code, see if there are any more errors or warnings that came up, and there aren't. And the reason why is because I didn't change that to bad photo badge reference DMX. So now if I go into my user mod models, private jack, props, pbadge folder, I am going to find the model files that were created by the two tools. Well, awful lot of stuff that went on in that particular session, and it's probably a long one. So what I'm going to do is, now that we have the models compiled, I'm going to exit out of everything, and I'm going to say private jack out.